be here, as I tell you every week. This is seriously one of my favorite things to do each week. If you're new today to this program, I started holding these conversations back in March as soon as the pandemic kind of broke out here in the States, just as a way of holding space for everything that we're all going through. There's so much grief and anxiety coming up right now, a lot of uncertainty. And I feel like a lot of new conversations about end of life, or at least new to people who haven't been through that experience. For those of us who have gone through loss and grief, I think a lot of it's been triggered during this time. And I just really wanted to bring together all the amazing people I know in this world of end of life and have these conversations and provide a space for you guys to come and be part of it, ask questions, and just to kind of, get some sense of community. I am so excited today to have a really good friend of mine, medium Fleur, here with us. Fleur's been named one of the best mediums in Los Angeles by CBS and LA Magazine. Her innate ability to directly communicate with loved ones in spirit has connected countless families. Fleur travels internationally, demonstrating mediumship, and teaches intuition to beginners and lifelong practitioners alike. She recently published the 10 Minutes to Intuition Journal, and she can be found at mediumfleur.com. Welcome, Fleur.
Hi, Claire. Thank you so much for having me back. It's so good to connect with you on here.
I know. I'm always happy to talk with you. So I'll tell that our personal story. We met, I think it was 6 years ago now. I was just finishing my second book, which was all about the afterlife. And for that book, I was trying to figure out finding ways to stay connected with our loved ones, how it affects our grief process. And I kind of went on a personal journey looking at how I could connect with my parents who I'd lost, with friends I'd lost, and then also really looking for all of my clients that I was working with. And I saw rabbis, priests, got into Buddhism, shamanism, but I also saw a lot of psychic mediums, because it was this thing that like my clients were coming to me in my private practice, having seen psychic mediums. And at first I was like, whoa, okay. I don't know I was really skeptical, and I was like, I don't know how to talk with my clients about this, So at first I was like, well, I'm just going to go see one so I can understand what the experience is and figure out how to talk to them about it. And then it became this whole thing where I saw probably 24 psychic mediums. You were the very last one I saw for the book. And it came about randomly. I had just lost one of my best friends that summer. My best friend, Abby, died that summer of breast cancer. She was 37 years old, had 2 kids. And I was spending some time with her husband a couple of weeks after she died and her kids, and he got an email from somebody in his community at their school community who had been to see you in Los Angeles. And Abby had come through, and so strongly that this woman knew it was Abby. She reached out to her husband to tell him about it. He told me about it, and I was like, I have to go see this woman. So that was how you and I met.
Yeah, here we are 6 years later.
Yeah. And we've now gone on to be really good friends. We work together. We have a podcast called Moving Beyond. But what we found, you guys, is, and I'm going to let Fleur talk in just a second. I'm going to shut up. But what we found is that we have this amazing crossover. So I've been, a grief counselor for over a decade, and I will have clients come to me, and there's like only so far I can always take them, where there's sometimes a point where they're stuck and they just can't get past something they need, some kind of validation, some kind of reassurance about their loved one. And a good session with a psychic medium can often be the thing that kind of gets them past that hurdle. Not that we don't continue working together, but there's just some piece sometimes that really needs to be part of that. And I know, Fleur, that you've sent a lot of clients my way too. So we've had a lot of crossover, and we've had a lot of conversations about the afterlife and grief. And I would like to just start.
Just your normal dinner time conversation. It's just, right. But I found that as well. It's been one of the biggest wonderful trajectories and changes I've seen over the 12 years now that I've been working is in the last 3-4 years, grief therapists, psychiatrists, even doctors do send me people. And in the beginning, I was just really, really surprised by that. But it has started to become a little bit more of an open modality. And you have definitely been one of the earlier adopters of that, I would say. So it was really nice in the very beginning just to have that conversation and then bring the conversation to other people. Because I do feel like we in our work are seen as having completely different camps in which we work, but then we're kind of ultimately working on the same thing, right? We're just looking at unresolved grief and how we can move people through it, and how there's an awareness of a larger game to it all, a larger understanding of it all, a way to process it. So yeah, I think in tandem it works really wonderfully, and we've definitely seen that in the podcast. It's been so cool, I think, even on my end, to get to listen in on your grief therapy sessions, because that's not an experience anyone really gets, right? We don't get that personal look, and then see how they're different from the mediumship, but how they work complementary to each other, and how ultimately somebody walks away with a little bit of a transformation. It's really been amazing.
It's been so cool. Let's start. I want to dig into some cool stuff with you, but let's start the basics for anyone here who's new to this whole idea. What is a psychic medium, and how did you get to the point where you're calling yourself one?
Yeah. So a psychic medium, a psychic is somebody who reads and connects to other people's energy, right? So it would be me talking about your life, or anyone else's life that's living. And then the mediumship is people who have passed, people who are deceased. But the idea that the spirit body, the soul, the consciousness, life force, whatever you want to call the part of you that's not the physical, continues on. It's also the understanding that that part of you that continues on can communicate, is intelligent, is aware of your daily life right now. And the two are similar in working only in that I receive the information through the same vessel. But outside of that, the psychic is very different, because we're looking at a person who's living a life right now versus a person who is living a life but just not in the physical form. Oh, and then when did I start? Yes. So always was super aware of spirit as a child. Wasn't able to identify what it was called. You know, I'm a 1990 baby. So I came into the world in 1990, and that was still a time period where there were some books on it, very, very few. My parents really didn't know what to make of it, but they knew there was something happening that was very real, and they didn't encourage it, they didn't discourage it, but it was definitely something they acknowledged as not being something I was making up. So it was different from the imagination. It was different from, kids talking about things that seemed out of the ordinary but imaginative, because there were very concrete details and names I was bringing up and conversations to people who just weren't in the physical world anymore that made them pay attention. So it wasn't until I was about 18 that I heard the term psychic medium, and at that point I thought, oh, that is what I do, and started to kind of understand that and started to work in that way. I would say maybe around the time I was 7 or 8, John Edwards had that crossing over with John Edwards in the 90s. And that helped to understand it for my parents. But I, at that point, was like, no, I don't want anything to do with this. That's not my life. It wasn't until I was about 18, 19 that I fully understood and started to understand that it was something I could do for other people. It was something I could professionally do in some kind of capacity. So that's when I kind of labeled myself as that.
John Edward was the first psychic medium I ever saw. So I've lost 2 best friends in the last 20 years. And one of them was when I was in my early 20s. She'd been a high school friend of mine, and she, at age 21, got leukemia and was gone within a year. And it was this really just such a traumatic experience for our peer group. We were all at the hospital all the time. We were all still in college, and our friend was dying. And I remember John Edward's book had come out that summer, his first book, and I had picked it up in a bookstore. My mom had been gone a few years at that point. My father hadn't died yet, but my mom was gone. And I had a lot of questions and thoughts about it all. And here I was watching my friend die. And I remember sitting with her in the hospital room, and her biggest fear, she said, her biggest fear was, what if when I get to the other side, there's nobody there to meet me? She was so young. She hadn't even lost anybody. She'd never lost a grandparent, hadn't lost anyone. And she was like, what if I get to the other side and there's no one there? And so we had this whole conversation about it. And I was like, Julie, I promised her 2 things. I promised her that I would name a kid after her. I have a Juliet, she's 8 years old. And then I also promised her I would go and see a psychic medium after she was gone and make sure she was okay. It took me 10 years to make good on that one, on that promise. And John Edward was the first one I went to. And at that time I was working as a grief counselor in a hospice, and I was so skeptical and nervous to go see him. I thought my colleagues would, scorn me for it. And then I was just nervous too. I felt like, What if I go and it is actually real? That was actually my
Yeah.
biggest concern.
Yeah. That tends to be people's biggest concern is one, it's not real. Will anyone show up? And then the second biggest concern is it is real. What do I do with my life then? So that is definitely a normal reaction, I would say, that you had at the time.
Yeah, I was like, I'm going to have to rearrange my entire belief system if this is real. And that is what ended up happening. Not necessarily with that first session with John Edward, but over the multiple mediums that I saw. Some I didn't have great experiences with, some I had incredible experiences with others. So one of the things for me when I was new into this was I was so worried, and this seems so funny to me now, but I was so worried that they were going to have found out information about me, and like John Edward was just going to already know that my parents were dead and that I was coming to find out about my friend. And I was really meticulous. I used like blocked phone numbers and fake email addresses and names, and I paid in cash, and I tried to get like super serious about this. And now that I know you so well, I'm like, God, Fleur would never have time to like do that. Can you talk to us about that fear that people have?
Well, I think it's an understandable one, right? Because there's so much information out in the world, especially in our day and age, that it does make the job of a psychic medium a little bit more difficult now, because what used to be really amazing information is now kind of like not as impressive because you could find it. So it's also shaped the way I work. I want to find the information that is the things that were said in private or the moments that no one would know about. And ultimately that gives the connection of like a personal endeavor, but or like a personal feeling of, yes, that's them. But I will say across the board, I mean, we just don't have time, and the information that's the most important isn't available online, I think, ultimately, and I would say that in any capacity, if you're ever worried about that with a psychic medium, kind of look at all the information that they've presented and look at, is that even available online? I think it's a really easy thing to go, oh, they could find that, they could find that, they could find that. But when you actually go and look, the stuff that's the most important or the most hard hitting isn't going to be the stuff that's like the facts you would find in an obituary. We tend to write very different things about people who have passed that aren't entirely reflective, I think, of our relationship with them.
Right.
So
yeah. All the really meaningful stuff for me has never been anything I've written about or posted anywhere that's come through. So do all of our loved ones, like, are they always accessible? Are they always somewhere? What is it like when you talk to them? Tell us about how that works.
Yeah. Well, I do think they are here all the time and also not at the same time. So it's a little bit of the hard thing to wrap your head around, because when we release this physical body, it's my belief that we also release a lot of limitations. So we release the physical form, meaning we also release any kind of limitation that physicality gave us. So you no longer have the understanding of places being something that you have to only inhabit at one point at one time. I've had a lot of spirit people tell me that they can be with multiple people in different areas of the world around the same time. So it kind of is weird for us to think about that when we take away these time and space limitations. But the best way that I've kind of explained or found an explanation of where exactly they are, that isn't just like right here, is the story that I heard once in a commencement speech that went something along the lines of, there's two fish swimming, and an older, wiser fish passes the two young fish. And he says, hey boys, how's the water? And the two young fish keep swimming, and they go, yeah, and they turn to one another eventually and they say, hey, what's water? And so the idea that you're in it, but unless you have a moment where you can step outside of it, you wouldn't even recognize that you're in it. And I think that the spirit world works much the same way. We are as much a part of it right now as we are differentiated from it. It's just a shift of awareness. It's a shift of kind of just understanding. And once you leave the physicality of the physical body, I think you can see the entirety of it. But while we're here, that's a really hard one to understand, because we're so limited by time and place. Like, we see things as very separated. It's like, well, I'm here and you're there. But if we even look at it as being phone calls or the Zoom situation that we're doing right now, we're able to be in connection based off of energy. we can make a phone call and through energetic waves have a very real time, same place, same time, a communication with each other while we are in completely different areas. And I think that that can help to understand how energy works in that same way. You know,
Yeah.
once we're not in the physical, everything kind of frees up.
I know that's kind of been my understanding, that it's so hard to kind of comprehend because it's wherever they are, there's different rules that kind of apply. But so tell me this, I feel like I do not have any innate psychic abilities. I kind of assume that if I really worked hard, I could cultivate these, but as it stands right now, like it's not happening. I'm not connecting with anybody. But if I'm having a moment and I really talk to my mom just out loud or in my head, can she hear me? Is she hearing it? Even though I don't I'm not seeing the response or.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, so walking you back 2 steps, I want to just quickly define intuition versus psychic versus medium, because I think that's important. We as people have an energetic vibration that's very much our own, right? So it's our radio station, and everybody else has a radio station too, and you continue to have one when you cross over. So you can think about it as your signal, kind of your vibration. It's your unique calling card. The way that we receive all information is through that vibration, through our own spirit body. So any kind of communication happens from spirit body to spirit body when it's energetic. So if I'm connecting with you, doing a psychic reading about you, it's my spirit body that's kind of reaching out to feel your signal and all the information that it holds. And the same is true for the spirit world. I think everyone is capable of it because we all have the same upmake. I have a spirit body, you have a spirit body, they have a spirit body. We're all working with the same equipment. And so in theory, you can absolutely connect. It's most, the key to it is learning how to differentiate the signals. It's learning how to get to that radio station and stay there. I do find that people who have lost people in their lives, that they would recognize that signal, right? Because if you are spending a lot of time around somebody in life, you start to recognize what they feel like. And that's not what they look like or what they smell like or what they sound like, it's their feeling. And if you pay attention to that, you'll find that people feel different. And you can even just take a moment to close your eyes and think about somebody who's very close to you in life and go, where in my body and how in my body do I feel them when I think about them? And then let me shift my attention to somebody else and how do they feel? You know, if we can take the rational mind out of it and just go, how does that interact with my being? And when they cross over, that signal that they have will be recognizable to you. And I think it's why you can connect with your own loved ones more strongly than with everybody else's. So it's a medium's job to connect with everybody's loved ones, all the signals, all the radio stations. Like we have a weird ability to hone in on all of them, but you don't need that ability to hone in on a specific one that you've heard a million times. You know that signal, you've felt it, you've experienced it. And so when you turn your attention to the spirit world, you can also feel it there.
It's complicated and also really comforting. It's kind of how I always feel about it. You know, I see a lot of people, and I've been through it myself personally, just really excruciating pain over loss. You know, just like on my knees on the floor. I don't know how I'm going to get through the rest of my life without this person here. I know you have a different understanding of that because you don't feel like they're gone. Can you speak to that?
Well, I do and I don't. You know, I think ultimately mediumship doesn't bring them back into the physicality. And there are physical experiences that you have with someone that make that grief very real. 100%. When you look at it from a vantage point, a bigger point, it's like, oh, everything continues. This is temporary. They're not sad because they know it's temporary, right? I get that question a lot. Are they grieving? Are they sad? Are they angry? No, not really, because they know that in a blink of an eye, you will be rejoining them, and really you're having the harder experience, to be fair, right? So it's really like, oh gosh, you're having a really hard time down there. Or, you know, it's not up there, down there, there's no positioning. But I think the experience of grief is the loss of the physicality and the flawed understanding or the misunderstanding that they're gone forever. So that is excruciatingly hard. If you take away the idea that they're not gone forever, you're still left with the loss of physicality. So it's still grief. And I myself have had bathroom floor crying, sadness, just because you're a medium doesn't mean you're going to lose the sense of that physical connection, because they do continue, but it's the spirit body that continues. And so you lose the kind of relationship that you had with them. I think the beauty is that you can replace it with a different kind of relationship. Because ultimately we work at our physical relationships. We make time to text people, call them, check in, meet for coffee, whatever it is. But I think when we have this understanding that they're gone forever, we don't invest the same amount of time to continue the relationship. And I think that the idea then is, if we can replace one relationship with another, then it can help in that grieving process. It won't change everything. It's not going to bring them back. But it's a higher understanding perhaps of the fact that they're not gone.
Right. One of the things I hear a lot of clients worry and wonder about is that their loved one suffered at the end. You know, I have a lot of people who've either lost somebody in a terrible accident or they had a long-term illness. And there's this sense that I can think of so many clients I've had who really worry that they didn't do right by their person, that they didn't do enough. They could have made better decisions or worked harder with figuring out the healthcare, or showed up at the time before the person died or something, and that their person suffered. You and I have had some interesting conversations about this in terms of like that's somehow irrelevant once they're on the other side. It was kind of some of the things we talked about. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it is really interesting, and it always continues to be a hard one for me even to rationally understand, because when I'm connecting to spirit, I see and feel it through their vantage point, and sometimes that's in conflict with my own understanding of the world. You know, it's like, I don't understand, like there's physical pain, why don't you seem to be bothered by that? Because I would be bothered by that. But it's true, once we transcend the physical, it's first of all, it's just a memory. It's an experience that you move through. And I think we can all look at experiences in our own lives that seemed excruciatingly terrible when we went through it. And then when you reflect back on it, you can almost be thankful or grateful for the experience in a way, because you found that it gave you something: personal power, sense of self-worth, an understanding of what you're capable of. Whatever it is, you can transcend the experience, you can give it meaning. And I think they, in a lot of ways, do the same thing, almost in a more automatic way, because there is no longer that same physical pain at all. There's a complete release of it. They're able to see how they created some of their own experiences, how a lot of it wasn't as important as they placed the emphasis on it. But there's never a sense of somebody should have done more, somebody should have changed things. There's never a sense of that. It's really just the experience that's given value, rather than the specifics of who did what. The idea of right and wrong doesn't really exist, to be honest. The sense of should have, would have, could have, it really doesn't mean anything. It's about the connection to the person, and that's all energetic, and we can see that as a deeper connection of love or resonance with someone. That's what rises up to the surface. And that sounds a bit new agey, fluffy maybe, but that is what it feels like.
No, I mean, I think these are the things that are really comforting. And this is one of the reasons why mediumship can get people over that hurdle that we could sit in therapy for hours and talk about these things, but the person cannot seem to get the reassurance that they get from you on those topics, you know? Another one is often like, is their person upset with them, you know, for lots of things, but also like how they're doing right now, or should they, you know, can they get remarried, or what if they have another child, or whatever the things are, and just worrying that their person isn't happy with them.
Yeah, and I think that is such an interesting conversation to bring to the table, because generally, always actually, the spirit person's like, I've heard these fears, I've heard these issues, we've been in conversation with them, you know, like, we know that you wish you would have done it differently, and it's okay. And so I always also like to acknowledge for people, you don't have to go see a medium in order to have those conversations. They are aware of it. It is in real time. If you express any kind of grief, just absolutely 100% know that they heard it, they got the message, you know, and accept it and want you to move through it. And I think that always the baseline of any spirit communication is the sense of wanting somebody to move forward and have the most expansive version of their life, filled with the most love, filled with the most possibility, filled with the most experiences. And that always looks like moving forward. There's just never a moment in which some person on the spirit side would say, I'd really like you to have a limited experience of your life because I'm no longer here. It just doesn't happen,
right.
you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Guys, I'm going to ask Fleur a couple more questions, but feel free to start putting questions for her in the chat, and we'll turn our attention to some of those as well. Fleur, in the last episode we did of this first season of the podcast that we did together, it was my favorite episode we did. It was so powerful, but it was with a woman who'd lost a child. And I feel like that is just one of the hardest ones to talk about, you know? Yet I've also met a lot of people who've lost children who really do seek out mediums. I think it's one of those things where you just can't, you're just like pacing a room wanting to get connected with your child who is gone and see if they're okay and, you know, just connect with them. What is that experience like for you when you are doing mediumship for someone who's lost a child?
Yeah, it's similar to yours, where it is the hardest kind of reading, one of the hardest to do. Yet when I'm in it, it feels just as peaceful, just as wonderful. It's a conversation just like any other. I think it can bring great relief. It can bring great peace. I think what is most enjoyable about communicating with kids is that I see them as ageless, first of all, so nobody's stuck in any way. The soul comes in without an age, really. I think we place the age on it based, of course, on the physical understanding of chronological time, but they don't stay at a certain age, yet their memories are from the vantage point of a child. And so it's a lot of fun to have them remember things and get to almost embody the childlike wonder within that, and give those memories to the parents that only they would know or only they would possess, to really give that sense of like, oh, they're here. You know, and also the understanding that the relationship doesn't end, that child isn't gonna disappear on the other side and no longer be a part of your physical world, because the purpose of coming together, them as a mother, a father, or a grandparent, and the child's relationship to them, that purpose continues. It was a purpose that was created, and it will be there until all parties, you know, are reunited, so to speak. And so that doesn't get absolved just because one person crosses over. And I think that can give great comfort too. That's a big worry for people, the idea that I'm going to get to the other side and they're not going to be there anymore, you know, or if I don't connect with them at all times in this physical world, if I don't hold that tether, then I'm going to let go and they'll be gone. And none of that's required. They'll walk beside you, so to speak, continue to be part of your existence, because just because they've left the physical body doesn't mean their existence is no longer there, and also that their purpose is no longer there within your own experience.
This is so comforting to hear. You know, for me, in my journey of getting to know psychic mediumship, there was this part of me for so long that needed to figure out if it was real. I kept needing to like prove it or figure it out or find some proof. And I finally came to this place where I just didn't care anymore if it was real, or I didn't care if I could prove it. You know, I didn't need to anymore, because there were so many experiences I had and so much evidence and so much comfort that I found.
It's been, and I would say too, that was a big one for me, even though it was coming through my own experience and my own understanding. I very much realized like it's always coming through my own brain. Like there is never a moment where this is outside of myself. Whatever I'm seeing, whatever I'm feeling, I'm hearing, it's coming through this vessel. So there has to be a bias. But I would agree with you in that, you know, it does require a slight jump of faith. Mm-hmm. And what has been so interesting for me to see just in traveling and talking to people is that from our Western perspective, we really do look at it from this place of rationality and thought. And then outside of the Western world, oftentimes people are much more based on feeling and experience. Mm-hmm. And I remember very early on having a reading with a Cambodian woman who watched me go on and on, giving evidence about her dad. Like, you know, he has a dimple in the left cheek and he's got a lazy eye and he had 3 brothers and whatever it was. And she just goes, okay. I know he's here. What does he have to say? And I was like, oh, right. The message. And I was very young at the time. I was like 22, but it blew my mind that she was like, I don't need you to prove to me that he's in the spirit world. I know. I feel him in the room too. I'd just like to have a conversation. So
Right.
it was so mind-blowing to me, because we really work from a sense of, I want the proof, I want the facts. I don't care about feeling it. I need to know. So it's quite liberating sometimes to make that jump of faith and to say, okay, all right, let me just suspend disbelief for a moment and see what the experience is. Because if I'm constantly in disbelief or rationalizing it, then I can't separate myself enough to have any kind of experience.
Totally. We have a million questions, which is exciting. The first one is from Tamsin, says, can a person who passed hear your thoughts, or do you have to speak out loud to them? And are birds used as messengers?
It's all vibration. So it doesn't matter if it's spoken out loud or thought. I think sometimes speaking it out loud helps us to feel that there's a clear conversation happening, because it helps to focus our thoughts and to really say, this is what I want to convey. But thinking can be just the same. I find that the conversation of signs is an interesting one. I don't think that the spirit world kind of creates birds out of thin air for you to get your message, right? It'd be way too much energy work. I think they possibly could, but probably isn't happening. But I think what is happening in that moment is, without your clear, directed understanding, your own spirit body, your own vessel was influenced by someone on the spirit side to look, to pause, to see, and that's the sign. It's the understanding that you are in constant conversation with things that you may not rationally realize. And in moments of signs, it is the influence of the spirit world on you more so than the sign itself. It's the influence on you to look in a certain direction, to go a certain way, to feel compelled. That's where the sign comes from. So it's actually you in tandem with the spirit world. You also have to listen. You also have to open yourself up to see. But yes, birds can absolutely be used in that way.
Abby wants to know, do you have any activities or exercises we can do to improve our own intuition? I think you have like whole courses and journals for this.
My God, yes, so many. A couple of places to start is, there's a journal called 10 Minutes to Intuition that I created. Just so we are clear on it, my definition of the intuition is information about you or information about other people that has to do with you. So the intuition is through the lens of information about your own experience, whether that's health, relationships, whatever it is, but it's always to do with you. That's different from the psychic, which is information about other people that has absolutely no reflection or interest in your own life. But opening up to both is important, and understanding the distinction is important, because a lot of times people get the intuition mixed up with the psychic. And that looks like somebody who is feeling way too much stuff and totally ungrounded and doesn't know what's theirs and what's somebody else's, right? So the intuition journal helps you to start recognizing the patterns. Your intuition and your psychic awareness always speaks in patterns. It's the way that your spirit body is collecting information throughout the day, and something has to allow it to bubble up to the surface. Right? So that's when we look at practices like meditation. It's when we look at practices that look like embodiment, getting the rational brain to take a step back. The spirit body's got information for you all day long, intuitive information. But if you don't open up the valve, if you don't do something to create space, it has no way of coming up to the surface. It just doesn't. So the practices that I would suggest to somebody who's in the very beginning stages of that is the intuition journal, is also just meditation, going for a walk, anything that takes your rational brain to the side. Folding laundry, doing the dishes will work. Sometimes driving, people have like these bursts of information while driving because your rational brain isn't engaged at that time. So that's where I'd start. And then I also have an intermediate course coming up September 5th. That's a mentorship. Sometimes I do beginner mentorships. I'll probably do one at the very end of the year. But yeah, honestly, I'm writing a book right now. So it's an entire book's worth of exercises.
Awesome. Heather and Brian have similar questions, so I'll just read them both and you can kind of answer them together. Heather says, do you ever just feel someone around? My boyfriend died last year and I feel his presence often. He also really does let me know he's here. And Brian says, is there a way I can know that I'm connecting with a spirit? So those are kind of interrelated.
Yeah. I think when we sense someone, it's very much the same as the intuition and the psychic work getting our attention. It's generally in a moment where your rational brain isn't as engaged. So you're probably doing something that suspended that rational thought for a moment, walking, running, waking up from sleep, whatever it is, some sort of repetitive exercise or thing. I think it happens all the time. They can definitely come to visit. You can also directly ask them, right? You can ask them to come. I think the how is an interesting question because it's going to be individual to every single person. The hardest thing about teaching the intuition and the psychic is that there's no cookie cutter. It just, every person's going to be different because the way that your physical body responds to energy will be through a pattern that's very uniquely your own. And so what you can do is kind of become really mindful of your patterns, right? So one thing that I've really started to work with people is start to distinguish what their experiences are when it's wishful thinking, when it's anxiety, when it's trauma-based, when it's just like repetitive thinking, what that looks, feels, and how it engages with your physical body versus the intuition. And the easiest place to do, or the mediumship, or the psychic, whatever it is. And the easiest place to start that is by looking backwards, is by going, okay, these are all the intuitive moments I've had. These are all the psychic moments I've had. These are all the mediumship moments I've had. How did they show up in my body? Where did they show up in my body? Was it instantaneously? Was it repetitive? Was it a sinking feeling? Was it butterflies? Was it goosebumps? Was it a vision? Was it just a knowing? And how long did it stay? How did it show up? What was the environmental interaction that I had when it showed up? And how is that different from me having like an anxiety meltdown, right? So if I'm late to something, I'm like, oh God, I'm late. And you can almost just see the worrying pattern within yourself. If you really looked at it, one thought's going to lead to the other, to the other, to the other. You'll probably come back to the first thought at least 10 times. And the intuition just doesn't work like that. Generally, it's a thought that comes and goes. Or the experience of feeling spirit will not be like an experience that you have outside of the metaphysical. It's just completely different. But it requires you to become very mindful of all of your experiences in order to be able to distinguish between the two.
That is such a cool way to break it down. I love that. I'm going to have to think about it for a while. Julie says, if you're getting any words from my husband, Jeremy, I'd adore hearing from him.
I'm not in reading mode, but I'm sure he's around. And I would also say that I do still offer readings. So if there's anyone that is interested in that, you could just go to my website. I do the express readings, which are kind of like within the next 2 months. I have a few slots per month open for that. And then my regular readings are about a year's wait list, but I promise I will get to you eventually.
There was someone, I think, who asked something about like, do you have to turn it on or off? And so like, just on piggybacking on that, like, do you have to, I mean, we've talked about this before, but I think it's so fascinating. Do you have to turn this on or off, or like, how does it work for you?
Yeah, I think it's always there to a certain extent, but for me to do the best job, to find exactly the right words, to open myself up to the experience completely, it's going to require me to move my rational thought outside of my awareness, what we were talking about before. Kind of creating a meditation space. And I generally like to distinguish it between a passive meditation and an active meditation. Passive meditation is just like, oh, I'm sitting in silence and I don't really want to be thinking anything. And then active meditation, which is the psychic, the mediumship, is turning that space of calm and tranquility and then focusing it on a signal or a point of interest. So in this case, if she wanted to talk to her husband, I would start off by creating a space of tranquility for myself. And then I would start honing in on the exact vibration that I want to connect with, his exact radio station. The closer I get to his radio station, the more information I've got. But it really, for me to do the best job possible, to give him some credit, right? To really, because it takes energy on his end too. They are great and happy to do it. But it requires both of us kind of finding that perfect fit. And I think in my experience, it just requires focus. You know, for you to do anything good with skill set and ability, it just requires you to be like, all right, this is what I'm doing. And I have over the years decided that I'd rather do it with focus and intention than just to like wing it, because it's sacred. And if he's going to have the opportunity to talk to her, he's going to be annoyed with me if I don't do a good job. So
I've always appreciated how careful and intentional you are with things. You know, we've been friends for a long time, and there's been times when I've invited Fleur to a party or done something, and she's like, I can't, I'm reading the next day for something big, and I can't drink. I have to be centered. Like, you've always been so, it's just made me appreciate your work and your ethic, like, all the more so. So
yeah, I do drink from time to time, just not when I'm working. We don't have to, you know, and I think that's an important distinction too. It's like we as mediums are still human, because we have to be. I think mediums don't get the experience of getting to sit on a mountaintop and like meditate all day, because we're about connecting worlds. So we have to be human. We have to have the human experience in order to like understand this, right? So I get it's the best of both worlds. I get to be human, and then at times have to like really be like, oh no, time to do the spiritual thing. So it's the distinction, but it's a balance.
Emily has a really cool question here. She says, how do our loved ones on the other side now know about events that happened in life before they died that never involved them? This came up in a recent reading with Fleur, where it came out that the person on the other side knew I had ripped up some notes and no one knew but me.
So the question is, well, if they're in the spirit world, they're seeing it in real time, right? They're like available to your experiences.
I think she's saying it happened before they died, but they didn't know about it then.
Yeah, I think there's probably an awareness greater than your own when you cross over. I don't know. I think it's been really interesting in my interactions with the spirit world to find that some of them have access to information such as the future, not all of them. Some of them have awareness of other people's past, some don't. I don't know, but it is possible. I think, you know, again, when you leave the physical experience and the chronological way of thinking about life, I imagine if they wanted the information, or if we're looking for it, they could find it, just like we can energetically if we are also interested in that information. Right. When if it's a skilled psychic, I could go looking for information about your past that I wouldn't have to be around to know. Similar, I think, when you leave the physical body in the spirit world, you would have access if you chose to look for it.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Tamsin says, in Buddhism, there is reincarnation. Can you still feel the spirit body if the soul has reincarnated? I love this question. Yeah. I've heard James Van Prague speak on this, and he's had some interesting answers.
Oh yeah, I'd be curious to hear what James says. I should ask him at some point. But I am conflicted on reincarnation. One, because I don't think it's nearly as simplistic as we have put it out to be. It just doesn't make any sense to me that you would pass in 1940, be reborn in 1941, live to 1980, go again, come back a year later. I think that the simplicity of that, it just doesn't make any sense to me. It's nice, it's organized, you know, but I don't think it works that way. I think it goes back to purpose. If you are a mother, you continue to be a mother. If you are a child, you continue to be a child. If you're a sister, a brother, a grandparent, whatever it is, your purpose is tied to the people left behind in the world. And I don't think you would reincarnate until that purpose is complete. That means that I would never connect with someone on the other side whose purpose is complete, right? Because as long as you are here talking to me and I'm connecting over there, there's a tether. So they wouldn't reincarnate. So I haven't had the experience of somebody or connecting with somebody who isn't there anymore, because if there's a person sitting in front of me wanting to talk to them, then they're going to be there. The purpose continues. But I would say that it's unusual for a great grandparent to show up. And I think they may have reincarnated. I don't know. The problem with reincarnation is I can't ask the people who've reincarnated because they're not there. So it leaves a vacuum of understanding. But that's my best guess.
I love this stuff so much. We should have made this like a 2-hour episode. There are so many more questions. Tracy has a really cool one too. She says, I have a question that I think about all the time. For people like my grandma who are positive they're going to heaven in the biblical sense, are they upset when they reach the spirit realm, or is there still so much we don't know? I love that.
She's like, man, I've been such a good person this whole time. And if I would have known that we were all just going to the same place, wouldn't have been nearly as good. I don't see a distinction between the idea of heaven and hell. I think we really do all continue forward. But I think that's the key to it. Like, it's a continuation forward. So you do lose a lot of the mental issue, physical issue, whatever. Like, it's all gone when you cross. But your own experience does continue. So it's not like you're like, boom, boom, forget that life, let's move forward. It's a continuation. Sure, you leave behind mental illness, you leave behind addiction, you leave behind physical pain, but it's not like somebody ripped up everything and it's like, we're done now. It's a continuation. You don't go anywhere else, I think, but it continues along with you.
BK wants to know, when you work, do you communicate with the person your client asks to communicate with, or whatever person comes through to you?
Yeah, so I would say in 95 to 99% of the cases, the people you want to connect with you. In the 5% that don't, it's not that they didn't want to connect with you, it's that I may have just not recognized them in the moment, and then they would show up later on down the line. So, the answer is kind of both. I generally will work in such a way where I just know that if you have set an intention for them to come in, they know that, there's an intelligence to it. So they're going to show up. And about 3/4 of the way into the reading, if it's particularly busy, and I love working for my 95-year-olds, because it's like, oh, here we go. Like 3 brothers, 2 sisters, all the grandparents, all the parents. Oh no, they're like step parents too, right? Like, it's just like the husband, the second husband, the 4th husband, the children. Like, it's just like, oh my God. So in that case, we would get through 3/4 of the reading, and I'd go, Dorothy, is there anyone we're missing that you really need to connect with? And in that way, I can go look for the signal. But generally, there's very much an understanding that the people that you want to connect with you as well.
I know when I came to see you, you didn't know anything about me, and I didn't tell you anything. And I sat down, and my friend Abby came through right away, and like a really detailed, just blew my mind, the stuff that you came through with Abby. And I hadn't told you about my parents. And they of course came through. Like, they always came through. Every good medium I saw, my parents came through, whether or not I kind of specifically invited them or not. I will say that the first really good medium I saw, this woman Delphina in Chicago, we've talked about her.
Yeah.
I went in to see her, and I was really like hoping that my parents were going to come through, my friend Julie. And I have a half brother who died, and he was the first one to come through. And I had not been thinking about him, really didn't care if he came through or not, like not in a callous way, but I was so there for like hoping for my parents and my friends. And of course they did, but I was so surprised. He was like right there and had a lot to say. And that was interesting.
I found a really interesting pattern within readings sometimes, that the least important people will be the very front of the line, because
that's how it was.
If they wait, they're not getting a turn, because by the time we get to the child, the husband, the parent, we're not leaving to go and talk to the half brother. Like, we're just not. I won't disconnect because it just doesn't make any sense. It would also be very anticlimactic to have this really like, and also your half brother is here, and he'd like, like, nobody cares anymore. So I do think there's an intelligence where they know who needs to say something that otherwise wouldn't be heard. And also I find that sometimes there are odd people that you may not expect on the spirit world who have very strong energy to offer and to kind of get it started. I feel like they're kind of the igniter sometimes. And sometimes they're the ones who've been crossed the longest, or just are particularly energetically powerful. And I find that interesting too. So I think oftentimes if I try to force it, if I say, no, she wants to talk to only her father, the whole reading stops, because they have a plan that they really don't care how I would like it to go.
Well, I mean, that's like my friend Abby coming through at your reading. You probably had 100 people in that room, and the person that she connected to was just a mom at her school that she didn't even know that well, and like she came through that strongly at that reading for you. It's so fascinating.
Sometimes hard to understand.
Carrie says, do you hear messages all the time? Do you ever get a break? And this is kind of, you talking about turning it on and off, but there is this, Teresa Caputo kind of started this whole idea of like, you're at the grocery store and like, you can't not be getting all these spirit messages and stopping people. Like, so what's that about?
Well, I think it is personal choice, personal discipline, and then also remembering that Teresa Caputo went into places that said, hey, we're filming here. So people kind of knew, and she was on a film set. So she was definitely prepared to be open and to be filmed. But I think that for my own self, there is a personal decision I made a long time ago that if, grief can be hard. And if somebody, that was the first day they got out of the house and they got to the grocery store, the last thing I would want to be is the medium who's like, hey, your son's here. It's just not the right time for it. I think especially now with mediumship in the 21st century and the way that we're doing it, if somebody really wanted to go see a medium and felt really called to it, they would just have to do a Google search and that's it, and you'd find somebody. And you could even look at reviews and you'd find the right person for you. So I like to say that that's not my job, meaning if somebody comes to find me, if they're somehow directed towards me, then fantastic, but I'm not going to go search them out because that I think is an element of free will. And as a side note to that, I've heard of people hearing about me in the craziest way. Like I'll have people go, I was just randomly walking my dog one day and this lady came up to me and said, I had to come see you. So like, here I am, or whatever it is. Like people, I think if somebody's meant to come see me, they'll find some way to come see me. And then also the discipline of it, I find that I'm a much more capable medium if I turn down for the vast majority of the day. I have more energy to give, and I think that's true of any kind of profession. If you're constantly on, you're just not going to be very capable in the moments that you need to be because you're just a leaky faucet. So
I'm like the therapist, I'll be on an airplane and somebody next to me will ask me what I do and I'll tell them I'm a therapist and they're always like, oh my God, are you analyzing me? And I'm like, no, I'm not. When I want to do that, I very specifically sit down and turn on that hat, but I am not walking around doing that all day because it's exhausting, right? And I am better at my job when I'm not doing it all the time. Let me ask you a quick question I haven't seen show up here yet. Just in the age of COVID, everything has gone virtual. One of the things people like to ask me about mediums because they know that I've dabbled in all this, and people are always saying like, well, I want to go see them in person. And I'm always saying, no, it's just as good online or over the phone. Can you talk about that and explain that? Because that's kind of anyone's option right now is only virtual anyway because of COVID. So can you explain why it's just as good?
Yeah, well, ultimately, I'm not reading you in terms of your physical self. I'm reading you in your energetic self, and that doesn't have a physical space limitation. So it kind of goes back to the idea of once you cut out the physicality of it, it's all possible. So I read energy, and energy, like a phone call, is able to come along just like that. It's available to be looked at from a distance. I remember, just a quick side note, one of my first experiences in the psychic world, I was studying it and I was really vulnerable in a space of like not wanting to tell anybody, but I had told one of my best friends, and I'm still best friends with today, and she's like, listen, Fleur, I know you don't do psychic work and I know that this is a secret, but I need your help because my aunt was rushed into the emergency room. She's in ICU. We don't know what happened. Please help. And I was like, I don't do this. This isn't my job. I was like 20. I was like, okay, fine, I'll look. So I was able from my bedroom in Los Angeles to tune into her aunt who was in the ICU in Florida without even talking to my friend over the phone or anything, just finding the pattern of like, okay, I know what Liz feels like, and Liz is connected to her aunt, so that's the signal, following it back to the source. Okay, here's what I see. And I remember seeing, I was like, I don't know, something's stuck in her lung. And they were like, well, that doesn't make any sense because she's in a diabetic coma, as it turns out, and there's nothing in her lung. I was like, okay, I don't know, told you this isn't my job. So later on, it turns out that when she fell into a coma and had a seizure, she had swallowed her dentures and they got lodged in her lung.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was the first moment where I was like, oh, maybe this thing actually works. And also it works at a distance. That was pretty crazy. And it happened very early on when I was 20. And so because of that experience, when I started working, I did everything remotely because I was like, I don't need to be in front of someone. And I didn't want anyone to know what I looked like. I lived in a house that I shared with 4 other people. So it wasn't like anyone could come in. So it was for the first 2-3 years, I only did phone. And in a way, it's kind of my comfort zone. So I've quite liked the last 8 months where I'm not seeing anyone because it's nice to be able to put headphones in and connect with someone and not have to worry about what I look like when I'm doing it, what their body language is telling me. If somebody comes in and they're like, I'm human, I'm already going to have a reaction to that. I'm like, oh, okay, now I have to, over the phone, it just flows. I don't have to worry about people. But yeah, so I think it absolutely makes no difference. It's just energy. If you can get past the physicality of it, then yeah, it's all the same.
I've never heard that story about the dentures. That's amazing. That's so cool.
Yeah, that's cool.
We are out of time and there are so many questions left, but I know that you answer a lot of questions about mediumship on your Instagram profile. What is that? Medium Fleur, at Medium Fleur. Is that your Instagram?
Yes, Medium Fleur across everything. FLEUR, Instagram, Facebook. And yes, I've been doing these little videos where I do kind of answer questions like this. So people can always DM me and I will make a little video at some point to talk about it.
Awesome. And then where else can we find you and what are you up to and like how can we get more of you, Fleur?
I am at www.mediumfleur.com. It's Medium Fleur across all channels. I still do readings. I have a intermediate course coming up very quickly, like next 2 months. I also have an online course for anyone who's wanting to do this at their own pace. It's a 5-week online course from the very beginnings of how do you access the intuition and the psychic work. It's got exercises, journal prompts, meditations, and then also some connection to the spirit world. So the last of the 5 weeks is how do I connect to my own loved ones? And so we look at that. That's a really good place to start for anyone who is wanting to kind of dive into it, not quite sure if they can, if they can't, it's a good, really nice way to start. And then I've got the Intuition Journal that's available on Amazon. 10 Minutes to Intuition. You can also find the link on my website. And what else am I doing? I still do readings from time to time. We have a podcast. So that's an awesome podcast called Moving Beyond. And we'll do another season of it in the future. And I think that is most of what I've got going on right now.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I always love talking with you. Thank you guys for all of your amazing questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to them. Please seek out Fleur and keep following along with her. She is just one of the coolest people I've ever met, and to talk about grief and death and all of this good stuff. We're going to send out the follow-up email that will have all this information in it too, so you can check her out there. Next week, we're going to have Michael Hebb, who is the founder of Death Over Dinner, and he's just started this incredible new end-of-life platform that we're going to talk about, and just talk about all kinds of more death stuff, because you guys love it, and I love it. Thank you, Medium Fleur. Thank you, Dara. Thank you, everybody who is here. This was an awesome session.
Thank you so much. And
thank you, Claire.
Yeah, that was awesome. I wish it was in my control just to keep it going. But maybe we'll be able to have you back at some point. That would be wonderful. Awesome. Okay, well, I put the link to Holding Space for next week. And then we also have Allison Gilbert coming up on September 10th. And I just wanted to note that we're going to have next week's, and then we'll have the one in September with Allison, but we'll be taking a little break until our new October festival that we'll be launching soon. So look out for that.
Thanks, everybody. This has been so great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Fleur.
Thank you, Claire.
See you guys next week. Bye.